There are many different formats in franchising. People have built a lot of wealth around learning the know-how from experienced franchisors and building their business. If you're looking at long-term franchise success, don't only focus on what the upfront franchise fee is and what the royalties are. You really need to focus on where the long-term leverage is. That could be in your secret sauces, proprietary items, or your business model controls. Constantly monitor quality, daily checklists, whether or not the team members are being informed of the new items that you're launching, whether or not franchisees, team members are being trained. You need to be able to keep your finger on the pulse of the business. And that means understanding what's happening in the business in real time.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Epic Spotlight by Epic Podcast. And thanks so much for joining us on this episode. We're focusing on business models today, specifically franchising, as an opportunity for new business owners to start your own business, or perhaps organizations that want to branch out and look at franchises as a potential revenue stream as well. Now, as we know, franchising is a fantastic option for businesses to embark on to reaching a wider audience and grow their revenue steadily. At the same time, as a franchisee, it's a fantastic option to kickstart your entrepreneurial journey. So, with us today, we have Hsien Naidu. She provides insights, practical brand development strategies, and deep experience in the franchise sector across the Southeast Asia region, supporting the growth of multiple local SMEs. She and I first met at Franchising and Licensing Asia last year, and I learned so much about her as well as the world of franchising through her workshops and also what she has shared at the event. So, Hsien, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Edric, for inviting me.
All right, Hsien, you have a wealth of experience in the world of franchising with Astreem Consulting. Give us a quick overview about what you do because, based on that description that I gave, I don't think I'm doing it justice.
Well, actually, for the long and the short of it, you absolutely caught it right in its essence. And my passion is just really simple, right? It's the joy that I get from working with brand owners and entrepreneurs, helping them grow their business, whether it's from a brand growth or franchise portfolio expansion perspective, both to help entrepreneurs grow their wealth, build their dreams, and when I'm lucky, franchising can also lift people from poverty.
Well, thank you so much, because one would never really think about franchising, right, as impact work as well. So thank you for sharing that. And once again, you bring new perspective, to wherever I'm at. Thank you. Now, I wanted to get your insights and just get straight into it, right? What is the franchising landscape looking like in Asia today?
So franchising is one of those age-long wealth building, business growing strategies that many entrepreneurs go back to. And there are many, many different formats in franchising, whether you're a single unit investor or an area franchisee or a master franchisee. People have built a lot of wealth around learning the know-how from experienced franchisors and building their business. But for the purpose of today, maybe I would just narrow it down from a Singapore perspective and maybe look at the single unit investor perspective. I'll start from that basic point, and then I'll build it up to an area and multi-unit or master franchise perspective. Okay. So for most single unit investors, Singapore is really one of the, still the safest and most efficient markets to start franchising, right? Because we've got very strong fundamentals. Our government is very strong. Our legal framework really exists to protect the businesses that operate within it. And in Singapore, even though people complain all the time about the high cost, difficult labor environment, so on and so forth, there's still, on the flip side, there's very, very strong consumer spending, predictable regulations, and also the operational standards and compliance standards are high. So that means that when a franchisee engages in business with a franchisor, they are at least protected within a framework. So I think that it is still an ideal place to learn the fundamentals of running a business. But at the same time, obviously, we cannot underplay the macroeconomic pressures that make Singapore, a little bit more competitive and arena than the surrounding regions. Rising labor costs, tight manpower, as well as high rental. There's also the upside where you can build long-term wealth potential of a single business unit. And from there, when you do well with one single business unit, you can then look at expanding into 2 or 3 more locations so that you can then sort of leverage the resources that you have across multiple locations. All right. I think it's a great place to start, but a difficult place to stay if you're only a single unit franchise for the long term. So my thing, if your goal is to build meaningful wealth, then to look at not only one location, but to grow to multiple units.
I think for any business, we're always looking at scaling per se. Franchising doesn't necessarily mean that I have to move from one outlet to another or opening up one business to another. And does it always have to be the same franchise? So I think the topic of going regional is a massive one. So please, let's get into that.
Okay, so regionally, however, the picture shifts, right? Because neighboring markets like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, they all have lower operating costs and they have a very strong expanding middle class demand, which is something that, in Singapore, I must say that we are all a rather matured market already. And then this means there's a lot more room for that multi-unit growth I was talking about, which means that in Singapore, we might be looking at multi-unit growth of 3 to 4 outlets for a single multi-unit investor. But from a regional perspective, I know of investors that grow their empire from franchising. Some of the customers I know actually own 50 to 60 pharmacy units or restaurant operations, so on and so forth. And they literally built a whole generation on franchising.
Okay, so we're going to circle back to that because I've got a couple of questions about how one actually expands. And I'd love to pick your brains on that. First things first, as a franchisor, now you operate in one of 2 ways. One of them is on the franchisor's end, which you are supporting in terms of their branding, in terms of their strategies and how to grow them. At the same time, I'm sure that by flipping that lens, you can also advise franchisees on how to make it work. So let's start with the franchisors first. You support them with the necessary frameworks, as I said before. And, I like to understand, right, what is it, right, that brands and services really should know about before they get into franchise game?
Okay, so that is a rather loaded question, right? Because from the outset, people would think that the franchising is simple. I've got a business, it's doing well, sometimes not even doing well. And I've got a brand name and somebody has inquired to, replicate my business. Let's take advantage of that. So if you ask anybody, that is probably the most layman understanding. If somebody's willing to pay you for your branding and you help them to set up the store and they're willing to pay you a royalty across a period of time, that is by definition some sort of franchise. However, if you're in the franchise game to stay, then there's a lot more detail that you need to get into. And that includes things like, understanding what your brand DNA is about, documenting it, understanding what success means in the operations of your business and documenting that, whether it's in terms of daily checklists, repeatable training processes, audit and compliance, as well as making franchisees successful through a coaching program or even using digital technology to help you gain insights on how your franchisees are performing at any one given time so that you can value add to your franchisees' potential success. You want to catch gaps early before it all turns into chaos and your franchisees end up firefighting and then everybody's pointing fingers at each other. So a franchisor actually has a rather big mandate to actually improve on how they communicate their best practices, how they knowledge transfer, and how they assist the franchisee to capture all their best practices and execute it to perfection.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. That's exactly what I wanted to bring up, which is it sounds so simple, right? Okay, I've got a good brand and I'm hoping that somebody's just going to take it to the next level and bring it, far and wide beyond our shores. But what you've brought up is that the franchisor has to be extremely responsible in terms of brand management, how the key messages, the engagement toward their customers, that longevity continues. And that really is on the franchisors, I think, plate, if I could use that word. I think one of the biggest things that came up from last year's conference was about quality control. How do you maintain standards?
I think the most important is to understand what makes your business different. How do you replicate that success? If you're looking at long-term franchise success, don't only focus on what the upfront franchise fee is and what the royalties are. You really need to focus on where the long-term leverage is. And that could be in your secret sauces, in your proprietary items, in how you execute your business, or your business model controls. Those are things that you need to ensure exist before you go out there and recruit a franchisee and then say, no problem, I'm going to teach you, everything I know. And then before you know it, your franchisee has learned everything you know, and you lose them because your franchisee no longer requires your guidance, your maintenance, and your stewardship. The second most important thing is to constantly monitor quality. Everything from mundane things like daily checklists, whether or not the team members are being informed of the latest developments in your brand, the new items that you're launching, whether or not the franchisees, team members are being trained, and whether you get affirmation that they have been trained. As much as you want to keep doing R&D, it's useless if your franchisees are not adopting them with the passion that you need them to keep your brand alive in the heart of the business beating. And of course, keeping and maintaining and growing that relationship and that success is actually your biggest challenge. You need to be able to keep your finger on the pulse of the business. And that means understanding what's happening in the business in real time. And to that end, I must say, as a segue, is that I've built a franchise management technology that helps franchisors build and keep their eyes on the entire franchise network. And we call it the ability to manage the business from a centralized operational command system perspective. When you know what's happening in every outlet at any time, you are able to intervene, you're able to support, you're able to take corrective measures when needed, and not when the customer starts complaining and you hear about it on Instagram or TikTok, all of which is actually way too late. All right.
Correct. Then after you end up being you're in a very reactive situation after
Absolutely.
that. And how do you then communicate that with the franchisees, right? There's, hey, there's no quality control, this happens. And then, there's this big kerfuffle of things that happen as well.
That's correct, Edric. So, of course, I oversimplify, but I think if you're just asking for the top 3 or 4 items, I think this would cover it. But in the long run, I think that the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee is more important and far outweighs the initial franchise deal that franchisees think is very important. Like most of the franchisees I know will say, oh, what's the fee, loyalty, and so on and so forth, right? But actually, I always advise from the flip side on the franchisees' end to not negotiate those things in the beginning. Understand the value of the franchise on both sides before you get into the picture, so that there is some equilibrium between the franchisor and the franchisee, which then allows them to have some understanding of their footing on both sides to really engage in the long term.
Okay, this is really great. I remember earlier on I said I would circle back to the Asian perspective and also scaling and growth, right? So I'd like to throw this question in right now, which is, from a franchisor's point of view, I love how you've positioned the relationship of franchisor and franchisee, because it almost sounds as though I'm not just imparting knowledge to you. I'm not just like almost loaning you or giving you a piece of my legacy, almost of what I've built up. But it's also about me being able to mentor you, to be able to have that relationship. So that's very interesting. And from a business research perspective, do you think that it's the responsibility of the franchisor to actually highlight to franchisees that, hey, there's a opportunity for you to go, let's say, for example, Philippines or Australia or Vietnam or wherever it is that doesn't have the name yet, but I think you'd be very good at doing this. And this is the market research. Do you think it's the franchisor's responsibility, or is the franchisee, supposed to be the one bringing this up?
I think that it is the franchisor's responsibility to understand their brand metrics and which market would suit their brand. However, if a franchisee is already doing well, understands the brand fundamentals, and has the right, connections in new markets, that is absolutely something that should not be undervalued as a business opportunity. But if there is opportunities, for instance, in the Philippines, but the franchisee knows nothing about, operating in the Philippines, then the franchisor may be opening themselves up to a risk, because if they knew the market so well, then they should have gone in and done it themselves. But most people, and most franchisors, franchise because they don't know local conditions so well. They don't know the locations, the rentals, the market conditions, the municipal regulations, so on and so forth, right? So that's why you need master franchisee or an area franchisee to take on that responsibility. But as a sidetrack, I would say that there have been many, many instances where franchisors did encourage franchisees to go into a different market because that franchisee maybe originally came from those territories, like maybe a Subway franchisee came from the Philippines and they know that market very well. And now they're looking for a different business opportunity to go back to home country. And they have already demonstrated experience in franchising. Then maybe that could be a nice candidate to be able to bring, for instance, Singapore brands into a different territory. Me, myself, if you don't mind, I'll give you an example. I'm a franchise consultant, so I get the unusual privilege of seeing the potential of different markets, and Philippines is one of those territories. So I worked with Seriously Addictive Maths to grow their business. But in the meantime, I found an opportunity to say, hey, Philippines is such a beautiful market. So why don't I set up a team, work with my business partners who are Filipinos, who know the market and the lay of the land, and opened up a business. And today, I am a partner of a business who is the master franchisee of Seriously Addictive Maths, that's from Singapore, that owns over 45 units of their altogether 280 plus outlets globally. So I think that's a nice business to be able to expand into, something that as a Singaporean master franchisee, I would never have had that opportunity.
It's very interesting. Okay, so for those who are listening or watching this, if you'd like to find out how she did it, as well as much more in terms of what's available in the region and maybe how you could also succeed in a similar fashion, right? Comment in the video and we'll make sure that somebody gets back in touch with you. And if you want more content like this, please also like, comment, and subscribe. Asia's leading franchising and licensing event, FLAsia 2026, returns 13th to 15th of August 2026 at Marina Bay Sands, Singapore, bringing together over 7,000 industry professionals, global brands, investors, and entrepreneurs. Discover proven business concepts, connect with partners, and unlock real opportunities to grow across the region. Don't miss out. Grab your free pass now. And now back to the podcast. Now, moving on to the next segment. Now, earlier on, we talked about the franchisor's perspective. Now, I'd love to be able to hear a little bit more on the franchisee's perspective, because once again, as a franchisor, we want to set them up for success. And you've already highlighted great points on what franchisors need to do to be able to do that. But franchisees, as what you mentioned, tend to go in and ask, what's the money up front? What's the real upside for me, right? So those tend to be obvious questions, but I'm sure that franchisees also need a bit of a kind of a training, a 101 kind of a masterclass. Now, apart from the obvious questions of money, what do you think are the things that franchisees should really ask? Are the key things they should ask before they start investing in a franchise?
Okay, Edric,
Basically, don't get duped.
I actually, this is a very, very important question, by the way. In the past, I used to run a whole training program to actually work with franchisees in their franchise selection process. And I think it was a 4-hour training for which people came in and basically set all their initial biases aside to actually learn the hard truths about going into franchising. So simply put, I would say before committing to a franchise, franchisees need to evaluate, obviously, a couple of areas, and I want to highlight 6. And they are maybe, like you correctly said, the commercial model, the brand strengths, the operational demands, what the franchisor is going to give them as support, what territory rights they have, whether it's a single unit, whether it's like a 500-meter radius and 1-kilometer radius and all that, they need to understand, and also the contractual obligations. Now, all this is about the franchise. And these determine whether the franchise is financially viable, operationally realistic, and the franchisee to scale beyond that single unit that I keep talking about. And most franchise investors, especially the first-time ones, focus on the product and the brand story, whether they like the franchisor or not, and stuff like that. But actually, to me, the real decision lies on understanding the actual numbers, the support system, and the long-term scalability of the model. And on another non-business related aspect, right? Before you even look at the brands, I think franchisees need to take a pause and reflect on whether or not they were built to be franchisees. Because not everybody is suitable to be a franchisee. When you're a franchisee, you need to be willing to commit to following the best practices of your franchisor. You need to be willing to listen to guidance. You need to sometimes, as you would if you were a child at some point, and we all are, for a parental guidance. And so franchisor's job is to do that. And when a franchisor doesn't do that, they might be not so the ball, and you might be led astray. And when you get led astray, brand standards fall, your business might, start to falter or slow down. And then, things might start falling apart. So I think that it's important that they need to reflect on themselves to see if they were actually built for franchisee perspective but can I just say that again? Whether they were built to be franchisees, right? Because if they are very creative, they're very entrepreneurial, and, they don't want to listen to anybody because they know that what they're doing is the best and the most correct way, and they are very good at building systems and stuff, they might not really do well as franchisees. In fact, they might be investing in a lot of angst and frustration. So one of the things I will say, and I support very strongly, is the fact that franchisees need to reflect on whether or not they are, first of all, suitable to be franchisees. And Edric, I actually have a little booklet called the Franchisee Success Code that actually summarizes all the things to look out for when you are looking for a franchise. And I would be happy for you to share it with your readers and your listeners if it's relevant. All right?
Oh, absolutely. I think every little bit of information counts, and it's helpful because at the end of the day, we're still talking about starting a business. And when we look at franchising, we want to also understand what makes the best. Number one, what is the best option for me? What can I study? But I love what you're saying, which is very introspective. I have to be self-aware enough to know whether or not, am I comfortable with risk? Am I comfortable with making difficult decisions? Do I have the skill set to run a business? And am I a better business manager, or am I a better people manager?
right?
Or do I even have problems managing myself? You know? And if that's really a problem, yeah, I mean, this is essential for any entrepreneur out there. And I really applaud you for bringing this up because this is something that we don't talk enough about.
As a side comment, is that there are some career HR managers or, big shot bosses who then step into franchising and they think that running a franchise is simple. And they tell me that no problem, I've managed through 300 people in my organization in the past. But a lot of times when you're running a franchise, you're not running 300 people. That's a given. But the flip side is that you're running maybe 5 to 6 emotional aunties and uncles who actually need a different type of management. And when you're running a franchise, you're no longer running the business for a big time conglomerate. Now you're running your own business. And the ability to be able to adjust to that level of who you're managing and what is relevant for the people you're managing is very important as a franchisee owner as well.
Very interesting there. Now, quick one to all the listeners and those who are watching as well. If you want to get a copy of this book, right, please comment book in the comment section. Okay. Now, moving on, I've got one more question with regards to the franchisee, which is like what we talked about planning for this episode, about what we wanted to bring to our audience, right? Is sometimes for the franchisee, or at least in general, when we are too close to the elephant, we can't see the elephant. So there are a lot of blind spots, right? And we've talked about some of the obvious questions: money up front, what's the business model, where we should go, so on and so forth. But I'd like to flip this around a little bit and ask, what, from your experience, franchisees, we ask a lot of questions, or prospective franchisees, we ask a lot of questions. What are the kind of the obvious questions that tend to fail us though?
The type of questions that most franchisees don't ask really is the not so exciting, not so glamorous kinds of questions. So for instance, in the beginning, when they look at the franchise, all they are looking at is, okay, do I like this business? Can I see myself working in this business? Yes. Oh, the franchisor is successful. And yes, the franchisor is going to train us and all that, right? But what happens is they don't ask, what is the training commitment? How much of myself do I need to impart onto this business? A lot of franchisees think that I have the money, so I'm going to invest in this franchise and it's going to be a great side hustle. So there are admittedly some investments that are designed to be a side hustle. So you need to figure out if those are the right franchises, right? But if you were investing in a traditional business unit format franchise, that would mean that you are looking at a business that is set up to replicate the success of a business unit of your franchisor. That means that you need to know how to actually do that replication, and you need to be trained, you and your team members, which means that you need to know how to hire those people. And a lot of times franchisees think that if I bring the money, everything is going to fall into place. No, that doesn't happen. You also need to understand what is your investment appetite. Because if a franchisee says that I have set aside $200,000 and the franchise model sort of works out to be about $200,000. If anyone asks me if that is enough to build a successful franchise unit, then I would caution the franchisee, you should at least plan for another 4 to 6 months of operational expense so that it gives you a time to get operationally efficient. Because when you look at the franchisor's financials, you expect that your revenue is going to be like what the franchisor predicts, right? And it's true. There are so many franchisors who actually open up their own outlet. And they will say that, Hsien, when I open up my outlet, my sales is at the top of, where it should be. And then after a while, it balances out, right? So for instance, if you're running a very successful dim sum shop or a very successful Japanese cuisine shop, everybody is rushing to your new outlet, right? So your opening revenues are very good. But you'll find that when you're opening up a franchise that already has maybe about 15 or 16 locations, your revenue might not be that boom that you're expecting, which means that you need time to actually build up that cadence so that you are able to your customer base and then predict what your revenue is going to be. So that takes time. And if you don't budget for it, you're going to find the first 3 months of your business entirely stressful and heartbreaking and, nerve-wracking, and you're not going to enjoy your journey. But instead, I would say, if you work with a franchisor who already knows how business is being run, how you attract customers into your store, ask the franchisor, what if I don't do well in the first 3 months? How can you help me? That would actually be a lot more useful than just understanding how much money am I going to make? What's my royalties? How much do I pay you? How much stock do I need? So all those are important questions, but they're not the questions that will help you when you are in dire straits, because you were unprepared. So I think that you need to actually have enough capital. So understand how much capital you need to set up the business, but also understand how much capital you need to sustain that business. So I think that's another question I think is important. Cost of goods, right? Because franchisors will say, you need to get XYZ products from us, but you need to also understand what are these products, how many percentage of these products occupy your actual cost of goods, something that underpins your profitability across time. You also need to understand how accessible these products are, especially if you need to, order yourself from the open market and stuff like that. You need to understand what quality means to the franchisor so that, when you order, for instance, a specific creme fraiche and your idea of creme fraiche and the franchisor's idea of creme fraiche is different and the product comes out differently, you might then face some penalizing from the franchisor because he thinks you're undercutting, but you thought that you were doing what the SOP said. And the other thing is hiring manpower, especially if you're in Singapore. How do you hire the people that will work in your store? And how do you ensure that they come to your outlets and work? There is room for you to ask these hard questions because in your mind, and franchisors will tell you, no worry, we'll find a way. But really in your mind, you need to also adjust to the fact that you need to have standby options on when your staff don't turn up, who turns up? And your idea is not you, it's not your wife, your daughter, your son, your mother, your father. Who can you rely on? And you need to be able to ask those questions, not maybe even to the franchisor, but to yourself as well, right? So I think at the end of the day, ask questions that affect your long-term well-being.
Yeah, definitely very interesting. You're talking about not just the setup cost, but the rainy day funds that you need. You need to look into your operational costs. You need to look into downtime and COGS, inventory management. All these are the things that I would say that even seasoned business owners, right, because we got blinded by hope, optimism, and we don't see that. And I love what you also mentioned about the manpower part, because many times we just maybe want to build something with our own hands. So you end up being in the business rather than on the business. So I think positioning that from the start of where you want to be, do you want to manage outlets or do you want to manage one outlet by yourself?
Yes.
That's also a big mindset shift that we got to have as well. If we're talking about, let's say, for a regional play or regional growth, I'm sure that you have some case studies about that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Singapore brand per se, but can we as a Singaporean take other countries' brands and bring them elsewhere as well?
Yes, of course, a franchisor is set up to scale, right? So what happens is that, maybe they have reached saturation at home, but then when they put it on the international market, it suddenly becomes a big buzz and people take on the brand and embrace it and really enjoy it from a local perspective. So for instance, there are brands like maybe FLAsia that has come into Singapore and the region Krispy Kreme, maybe Cinnabon, Wingstop, as well as maybe Kumon, for instance. When they went overseas, their overseas market became so much bigger than their local markets, right? And so what did they do? They relaunched their brand with a new spin. They adjusted their pricing strategy so that it would fit the local market better. Also, they introduced local products, regional specific products that would fit the local market. And then they also rebuild their brand presence to fit the local demographic. So maybe at home, the brand might be a little bit tired, but in a new market, they have a chance to retell their story and refresh their brand and re-engage with the customers. It is a business model, franchising, that allows you to engage with new markets and embrace that local culture to represent your brand again. And it gives your brand a whole new opportunity to, champion a completely new market.
That gives me a lot of hope because it shows that as a Singaporean, I now have an opportunity to also invest in brands not based in my own country. And I can also, like, say, for example, if I wanted to invest in an American brand and they wanted to bring it to Asia, I could still be that link or that bridge for them. So that's also an interesting model, you see, which I think directly thinking about it as a franchisee, we'd just be thinking about our own turf, my own backyard. But I may not be comfortable venturing that far out. So by removing that cap, I think it really opens up more possibilities. So thanks so much, Hsien, for joining us on this podcast. Now, again, a lot of information to digest. I'm really so glad that I got to connect with you once more to learn more and pick your brain on everything franchising, right? Tell us a little bit more about what's going on in your life and how can others connect with you?
So what's going on in my life? My life is all about franchising. So as we speak, I'm preparing for next week's Franchise Asia Philippines. And that is a place where we are showcasing Singapore brands and bringing potential investors from Philippines into Singapore. And we are curating brands so that we can bring visitors, potential franchisees to come and visit our beautiful Singapore brands. And similarly, we're going to do the same in Franchise International Malaysia. But most importantly, all this culminates with the FLAsia show that we are working towards in August. And we are also curating all our brands to be ready to welcome all the visitors that FLAsia is inviting to Singapore. So I'm really looking forward to it.
All right, one last thing. If you want to connect with Hsien, you can always look at her website as well as connecting with her on LinkedIn and looking for her on social media as well. Links will all be in the bio, comments, or description, wherever that you want to find this information. She's there. And once again, this has been an episode of the Epic Spotlight. So, Hsien, thanks again for joining us.
So welcome. And again, thank you for having me.
All right. See you at the next episode of the podcast. Bye, everyone. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And if you do, please remember to give us a like, comment, and subscribe. Show us your support so that we can continue to make this podcast better and better and keep inviting all the heavy hitters in the world of business to this show.